It's weird being the age that I am and being an Atari fan, because most of the people that love Atari look like my dad. But that starts to make a little bit more sense when you look back and realize that Atari's peak in relevance was 50 years ago. Half a century. And it seems that the only story there is to tell about Atari is the one that we've been told time and time again, about their meteoric rise in the 70s and subsequent fall a decade later, dubbed the infamous video game crash of 1983. It's a very poetic story about the importance of quality control. But I find it especially ironic that the story everyone keeps repeating is of Atari failing, especially because since the crash, they have done nothing but fail time and time again. Atari has had plenty of time to learn their lesson about quality control, and the only explanation as to why they haven't must be that they're simply addicted to failure. This video is sponsored by the ROG Flow Z13 gaming tablet, which is bringing PC horsepower to the tablet world. The keyboard is magnetic, so you can pop it off entirely or fold it so it acts as a screen protector. I have never seen a tablet so effortlessly jump into AAA games like Black Ops 6, Spider-Man 2, or Baldur's Gate 3. But it's not just a gaming tablet, it's your ultimate portable workstation. You can do Blender or video renders on this thing. And that's because it's backed by the cutting-edge AMD Ryzen AI Max Plus 395 processor, packing 16 Zen 5 cores and 40 GPU CUs. It keeps all that cool with dual second-gen GenArc Flow fans, a lightweight stainless steel vapor chamber, and liquid metal thermal compound, so it stays cool and whisper quiet. It's got up to 128 gigs of unified quad-channel memory with a dedicated NPU, a high-performance GPU, and the ability to allocate up to 96 gigs of VRAM. Technology has come such a long way for them to be able to pack this much into something so thin and light. Not only have I been playing a whole lot of Shadow Generations on this thing, but I also played some of the Atari PC games that I featured in this video on the tablet as well. So check out the ROG Flow Z13 using the link on screen or in the description. Despite the fact that the Atari brand has changed hands several times since the crash, many things have remained consistent. And this is how I'm going to be breaking the video up into segments. Number 1, they constantly release shovelware that no one cares about, ruining the namesake of tons of old IPs in the process. Number 2, they frivolously license their name to ventures that are exclusively stupid and terrible. And number 3, they seem to have no problem, allegedly, scamming their customers to make a quick buck. Chapter 1. Atari releasing shovelware that no one cares about. For the past 20 years, Atari has been hard at work putting out video games that fail critically, commercially, or both. Since the early 2000s, they've tried to repackage their own legacy titles just to be met with unenthused press every time. So they came to the shocking revelation that maybe taking video games from the literal 70s and putting them on modern platforms isn't gonna cut it. So in the 2010s, they started giving their old titles a fresh coat of paint. In the 1982 Atari game Haunted House, you play as a meatball, and you run around these dark corridors and you try to avoid ghosts. It's a very charming little game. I like it just fine. In the 2010 reboot, however, you play as a guy. Now, despite the lack of meatball, it's still pretty cute, but it featured ugly artwork, horrible controls, and outdated gameplay. So they rebooted it again in 2014, called Haunted House Cryptic Graves. It was a first-person survival horror game, kind of like Amnesia, completely unrecognizable compared to the meatball game, and it was so unbelievably bad that it was pulled from sale and Atari swept it under the rug like it never happened. So they tried again to reboot Haunted House in 2022, called Haunted Houses Reimagined. It's okay, it's got a cool style, but it feels more like a proof of concept than a finished game. And then they rebooted it again in late 2023, and they're asking $20 for it. Now I have to ask, did the Atari Meatball game really make such powerful waves back in the day to justify the novelty of reimagining it 4 different times? And I feel like that's where Atari might be missing the point a little bit. The 2023 reboot of Haunted House, who is it for? Because surely I would be the target demographic, right? But I can see from a mile away that this game is creatively bankrupt, and I don't want to touch this shovelware crap with a 10-foot pole. And evidently I'm not alone. This game released in October 2023, and it has sold a 3-digit number of copies on Steam. It didn't even break 1,000. But that's just Steam. Let's be generous and hypothesize it sold around the same amount on all platforms, including this stupid thing, which I will be addressing later, don't you worry. That's about 3,900 copies. Eminem's Beach Party for Wii sold 10 times as many copies. So I guarantee you that right now, I am giving Haunted House 2023 more exposure than it has ever had. So let's shift gears to another famous Atari franchise from 1982 called Yar's Revenge. I absolutely love this game. It's so iconic, it's so ominous and surreal. I really like it. I'm a huge fan. Sure enough, they gave old Yar's Revenge the reboot treatment, and it went about as well as you would expect. The 2011 reboot is just called Yar's Revenge. It has this goofy anime art style, and it tries its best to make you care about the story, but as soon as I got into the gameplay and realized they turned it into a rail shooter with some of the most awkward controls ever made and graphics coming straight from Halo 1, I realized this game did nothing to earn its namesake, so I turned it off. But of course, they couldn't leave it alone. In 2022, they released Yar's Recharged, which is pretty okay. It's more recognizable, but the game's a bit buggy. The sounds break a lot. It's a bit content barren, but for $10, it's fine. I feel like they didn't get a good balance with the complexity here. Like, I don't think Yar's Revenge makes sense as a bullet hell game, so I didn't love this one. Also, in 2022, they released Yar's Revenge Enhanced, which is the exact same as the Atari game, but with new graphics and music. It was included in Atari 50, which is actually pretty good, but I think they'd need to go for a presentation overhaul if they want this new old game concept to stand on its own. If they did something similar to Space Invaders Extreme, I think Yar's Revenge Enhanced would be sick, but in this state, it feels very superficial and it just makes me want to go play the Atari game. And then in 2024, they announced Yar's Rising, a colorful future punk Metroidvania reimagining, which seemed exactly aligned with my taste, and you better believe I was counting down the days. They released some of the soundtrack before the game came out, and I was banging my head. The music was amazing, and so much of the art was stunningly beautiful, and the game was made by WayForward, who I really like. They did Shantae, SpongeBob SquigglePants, Mighty Switch Force, Adventure Time Hey Ice King. Those games are peak. And when Yar's Rising came out, I put like 3 hours into it. It's really bad. It's the most uninspired Metroidvania I have ever seen. The dialogue is awful. I hate these characters.
Shrug? Hey, while you're there, can you grab me some wasabi maple chips? Your boy is starving!
I found this huge rainbow-colored console that rewrote my DNA, I guess. And now my hands shoot energy waves.
The level design is bland, it's extremely linear, there's no sense of exploration at all, and the constant loading screens drove me absolutely insane. And where the Yar's Revenge part comes in is in these little hacking minigames, where you stop playing the game and you start playing Atari for a minute, and then you go back to the game. Like, it's cool in theory, but it doesn't add anything for me. It feels inconsequential. I'd rather just turn the game off and play Atari. Can Atari do literally anything right? No. They rebooted Bubsy. If you don't know about Bubsy, he's a stupid cartoon bobcat from the 90s, and I love him more than I love myself. In 2017, Bubsy, The Woolies Strike Back was released into the world. It's a reimagined platformer featuring Bubsy. Now, wait a minute. I thought we were talking about Atari. That says Accolade. Accolade was the company that made Bubsy back in the day, and then they got acquired by Infogrames in 1999, and then Infogrames became a subsidiary of Atari. So they have the legal right to use the name Accolade, but it's still Atari. And I'm sure you would have never guessed, but Woolies Strike Back is yet another one of Atari's creatively bankrupt shovelware escapades. Not a single shred of passion or enthusiasm was involved in the process of making this game. A lot of people cite Bubsy 3D as one of the worst video games ever made, and they're probably right, but that metric doesn't really mean anything to me. What I do know is Bubsy 3D is bizarre and esoteric and experimental in a way that makes it truly one of a kind, whereas Woolies Strike Back looks like it was made using a Unity game dev tutorial on YouTube. If I had to pick between something earnest like Bubsy 3D and the shovelware slop that Atari puts out, I will pick Bubsy 3D every single time. They made another one in 2019 called Bubsy Paws on Fire, and Atari actually put their name on this one. But the weird part is, it doesn't have anything to do with Bubsy. It's just a generic auto runner game with Bubsy assets dropped in, and it costs $25. Once again, who is this for? The only people that would enjoy a game this simple are kids, but kids don't care about Bubsy. Bubsy is from 1993 and was never popular outside of infamy. I'm sure for a lot of you, this might even be your first time hearing about him, in which case you're welcome. All right, shifting gears. Back in 1982, Atari made a game called Food Fight. It was an arcade game that I liked a lot as a kid. I always thought the animation of eating the ice cream was super funny. In mid-2024, Atari rebooted it. They called it Food Fight Culinary Combat. It's an online third-person shooter where you throw food at people, clearly trying to play off of the popularity of Fortnite and Splatoon. Of course, this game feels like a mobile game ad, but again, I have to ask, who is this even for? People that remember the 80s arcade game? Because it seems like they're aiming at kids who definitely won't know or care about the property it's based on. Now, I bought the game. It was $15. And honestly, it's all right. It has a bunch of game modes. The hub world has some fun detail to it. It felt reasonably polished. Out of order. Out of order. This is just like going to Dave & Buster's. But even before I bought the game, I saw that it had like 40 reviews on Steam, and I was like, oh, the servers are definitely going to be empty. And for a game that seems to have a focus on online play, that's a bit of a problem. So I opened it up on a peak Friday night, went to the matchmaking, and there was not a single other person online. So I pulled up the concurrent player history. This game is not even a year old. It launched in July 2024. It peaked with 12 like a month later, and then it's been 1 to 3 people since then. This game has never had a full lobby of players, not one single time, since the game released. And I felt silly for expecting anything but disappointment from Food Fight Culinary Combat. I feel like I've made my point. Atari keeps releasing shovelware slop video games that either no one cares about or no one likes. And you can't even give them credit for publishing masterpieces like Roller Coaster Tycoon, because they were also the ones that ran it into the ground with horrible sequels one after another. And they just acquired the Intellivision brand, which has been nothing but a PR nightmare for the past 5 years. I can only hope they run them into the ground too. Chapter 2. Atari licensing stupid and terrible ventures. Based on how little respect Atari seems to have for legacy franchises, I'm not surprised that they don't respect their own namesake either. They seem to have no problem attaching the Atari name to a shocking amount of stupid and terrible ventures. One of the least stupid and actually more recognizable examples of this is Atari licensing to AtGames and MyArcade. They have a series of consoles called the Atari Flashback. Some you can plug into a TV and some are handheld. You boot it up and you can play a collection of Atari games that are built into the unit. I really don't have much of a problem with these. They're cheap, they're good enough, you can go to Walmart and find them. They're not meant for the hardcore crowd. You know, they're meant to be a gift for your dad, right? But if nothing else, I think they definitely contributed to giving the Atari name such a bargain bin vibe, and that's why I think it's important to mention. I've seen a lot of people online that are very unsympathetic towards the new Game Station Pocket that MyArcade is coming out with, and I think that's fair, but once again, they're fine. They're just not applicable to me specifically. In terms of stupidity, I'm going in order from least to most, so naturally, next on our list is the Atari hat. So back in 2017, 2018, I remember hearing about these everywhere. It's a hat, it says Atari on it, and it has speakers on the brim. And you can connect it to your phone with Bluetooth, and your hat can play music. It really does feel like they bought a bunch of like cheap Chinese stock, like put their logo on it, and then resold it on their platforms for a markup. It's like a Soulja game level grift. Now, because these launched like 8 years ago, I was expecting that I'd have to go on eBay to buy one, but no, you can still buy one. They're just on Amazon, and they're on their official website. Now, whether or not you'd want to is a whole other discussion, because I imagine this thing will be very subjective. I'm sure the first question you'd have is, do the speakers sound good? No. They do not, because they're so thin. They have a ton of high-end, very little mids, and non-existent lows. Battery life is excellent. I ran mine for probably 20 to 30 hours on one charge. It looks great. It's surprisingly comfortable. It feels quality. Like, for 25 bucks, consider me thoroughly impressed in the hat department. But don't worry, that is the extent of the good things I have to say about it. I cannot stress enough how unapplicable this product is to the vast majority of people. Because as soon as you start considering the logistics of a hat with speakers on it, you start to run into a lot of problems. First of all, this is socially unacceptable to use in almost every scenario. In any setting where I'm not completely alone, I feel like it would be inconsiderate for me to play audio through the hat I'm wearing. It is preferable to everyone, including me, to just wear earbuds. They sound better, and I don't have to sacrifice my privacy. Secondly, you can't get it wet. There are electronics in there, it's got batteries and such, so it is incompatible with rain and also being washed. Hope you don't sweat too much. Third, if you really need a speaker in a pinch, you might as well just blast it out of your smartphone, because this thing doesn't get any louder or sound any better than what your smartphone can already do. Even if I don't end up using the speaker part of it very often, it's just a comfortable hat. I just like the hat, okay? I know it's really stupid. I'm very surprised they're even still selling them, but they're cheap and weird enough that I can't really get upset about it. But you know what I love more than Atari games? Hot sauce. In late 2024, Atari launched AtariSauce.com. This is real, and you can find a selection of 10 Atari game-themed hot sauces. Welcome to AtariSauce.com, where classic gaming meets bold, flavorful adventure. Have you ever wondered what the dragon from Adventure tastes like? Well, we ground it up into a paste and bottled it for you. How about the literal space rocks that you blow up in asteroids? Apparently they taste like barbecue sauce. The humanoid must not escape without trying the electric citrus hot sauce. Yeah! Atari's Revenge. What could this even mean? This game is so surreal. Unleash your inner Yar with this Inferno level hot sauce, spicy enough to seek revenge on any player. All they had to go on was the title. These people don't know what Yar's Revenge even is. I would have bought a few bottles just for the curiosity, but I was too late, and I wouldn't have received them in time for the shoot because they're based in the UK. I found out that they licensed their brand to a British hot sauce company called Sauce Shed that specializes in doing exactly this. Sauce Shed also worked with Capcom to make the Street Fighter hot sauce, which you can also still buy. It's a little bit lame knowing that Sauce Shed does this for a bunch of different brands, but it's pretty harmless, all things considered. In 2020, Atari launched their grand idea for Atari Hotels. They had all this concept art and all this press. They started sponsoring motorsports so they could slap the Atari Hotels logo on a cool car. And then nothing happened for literally 4 years. They came back in early 2024 and they were like, oh yeah, we're still working on that. We're working hard. It's 2025 and we have still heard nothing. Unfortunately, I have to be a bit of a cynic about this. How do they plan to build 10 gigantic futuristic hotels across the nation when their games aren't selling, their stock is worthless, and the average person does not care about Atari even a little bit? How do they expect to get the funding for such a huge project when no one, and I mean no one, would want to invest in them? Oh, by scamming people. That's how. Chapter 3. Atari scamming their biggest fans. Atari has fallen into quite a few business ventures that have allegedly scammed people in one way or another. Let's get all the Web3 stuff out of the way first. Back in 2020, Atari made their own cryptocurrency. They called it Atari Token. The token sold out in a day, and they raised $1 million from their biggest fans. They promised a lot of things for the token to do, but they only ever launched one thing, which was the Atari Casino, where you could gamble online using your Atari tokens. The market cap inflated to $20 million. Then Atari ended their partnership with the company responsible for managing the token, effectively freezing investors' money in place, promising they could transfer to a new version of the Atari token when they decided to release it. But the new token never happened. So a year later, Atari offered investors an exchange for a fixed amount of the Sandbox token, which is a Web3 game they were associated with for a short period. But because it was a limited amount, many holders of the Atari token received far less value compared to their original investment. Essentially, it was a rug pull. They created the token out of nothing to vacuum up their fans' money, made good on none of their promises, then they set the whole project on fire and ran off with all the cash. Also, Atari launched a range of NFTs, which I'm going to explain because they're irrelevant now. They were a trend in the early 2020s where you pay real money for a digital asset, say a piece of art. You could trade them and their value would change depending on the market and demand. All that good stuff. Tons of fans bought in 2021, but the bubble popped, and now the asset is worth a small fraction of what they paid. For example, here's an Atari NFT that minted for $2,433, and it last sold for $16. But hey, at least you can get your worthless NFT printed on AtariPrints.com and hang it up on your wall. That's kind of neat. Almost makes your $2,400 loss not seem so bad. But yeah, the whole Atari cryptocurrency and NFT thing looks a whole lot like a scam. Atari allegedly collected millions of dollars from their fans and ran. Just a disclaimer, I know very little about Web3 stuff. I researched to the best of my ability, but just in case, please consider this past segment speculation on my part. I am not making an accusation. This is all just theory. I'm sorry that I had to acknowledge Web3, and I don't plan to ever do it again. But yeah, it wouldn't be the first time that Atari took their fans' money and ran. In 2017, Atari was involved in a Kickstarter venture to create the Atari gameband. It was like a gaming watch or something. They took people's money, raising $325,000. The project fell apart, and no one ever got refunded. If you bought an Atari gameband in 2017, you got scammed out of a minimum of $100, and gamers have not forgotten. But there's more to the story. The guy that was behind the gameband, Condelad, I think that's how you pronounce it, was also responsible for doing some engineering work for the Atari VCS. Atari hadn't paid him for over 6 months, and they owed him over $100,000. So he sued Atari for non-payment. They settled out of court, awarding Condelad $82,400, which is a hell of a lot better than nothing. And equally, Rob Wyatt, one of the engineers responsible for the original Xbox, did a bunch of work on the Atari VCS as well, and he also went unpaid. So Wyatt sued for the money he was owed, $261,000, and Atari just never showed up to court, so an entry of default was filed. Atari not only allegedly scams their fans, but they also scam their employees by just not paying them for the work that they do for up to 6 months at a time, as alleged by these lawsuits. And then the final chapter, Atari in the modern age. We all know from hindsight that those efforts were not worth it. The Atari VCS spent 4 years in the oven and still came out half-baked. Let me give you a bit of backstory. This is the Atari VCS. It's a brand new video game console that Atari kickstarted in 2018. Everyone thought it was was a scam for 4 years because there was a bunch of really suspicious behavior going on their part, and the project kept getting delayed over and over, but it did eventually release in 2021, and it was met with collective groans from the gaming community. This thing was ridiculously expensive. It launched for $400. That's $100 more expensive than a Nintendo Switch. And what did that money get you? It got you some horribly underpowered hardware with no games, and the games that were there ran poorly. Tons of devs didn't want to port their games over because the console didn't sell, and the feature that allowed you to run Windows or Linux on the VCS, people just didn't care. Like, that didn't end up being a selling point at all. And recently, I've seen a lot of bickering from the community about Atari just not releasing content for the VCS anymore. Like, they were supposed to release a DLC for Atari 50. They announced it and they just never did. And instead, they just gave people like a Steam key for the second DLC. How are you gonna make people pay like $400 for a brand new console that came out in 2021 and already stopped supporting it by 2024? This is absurd. My original plan was to plug the Atari VCS into my capture and show some shots of the UI as B-roll. But in my attempt to do so, I accidentally ended up creating a perfect demonstration of how shockingly terrible this console is, so here is a whole segment about it. When you boot up the console, it asks you to connect one of the two controllers it comes with, but no matter what I did, neither of them would connect. I put them into Bluetooth pairing mode, and they just never connected. I tried everything. So instead, I resorted to plugging them into the console with a cable. Now, I would complain about the fact that these controllers from 2021 use micro USB, but that's not even the worst crime being committed here, because the micro USB slot is keyed, which means I tried to plug in a few different micro USB cables that I had around, and they won't fit because this plastic bit is in the way. It was only when I found my Atari branded micro USB cable that's keyed in the same way that I could plug it in and finally get past this screen. So I set my language, connected it to my Wi-Fi, and then the console proceeded to update and then reboot. I set my language and Wi-Fi again, the console updated again, and then the screen went black and never did anything else. I unplugged it, replugged it 100 times. It just produces a black video signal via HDMI, and that's it. The console had successfully bricked itself via an update, which apparently is a very common problem. So I had to dig to find an Atari OS drive image online, write it to a flash drive, plug it into the Atari VCS, plug in a keyboard, mash escape during boot up, select the flash drive, wait until it reflashed Atari OS, and then it got to this screen and Bluetooth still doesn't work. So I had to plug the controller back in, set my language again, set my Wi-Fi again, wait for it to update, reboot, set my language again, set my Wi-Fi again, wait for it to update, wait for it to flash the BIOS and firmware, and then you're never gonna believe this. I had to set my language again and my Wi-Fi again, select my account, and after a full hour, I finally get to see the main menu, and there's nothing here. It comes with one game, which is the Atari VCS Vault. It's a decent collection of Atari games from 50 years ago, so I went onto the shop to check out some of the free Atari 2600 games that they offer on there. I downloaded them, and when I open them, nothing happens. It just goes back to the menu instantly. I got 3 different Atari 2600 games, and they all do the same thing, they just don't open. This console released for $400 in 2021, and it can't even play Atari 2600 games that are on its own storefront!
I can't believe I paid $400 for a console that can't even play its own games.
For as overwhelming as Atari's failures have been these past 25 years, I'm optimistic that we're finally reaching the light at the end of the tunnel, because a few years ago, they released their new platform called Atari Plus. As of the time of this video, there are 2 consoles. There's the 2600 Plus, which I have right here. They also have the 7800 Plus. They cost $130. They have native HDMI, so you can just plug them right into your TV. The killer feature of the Atari Plus is the forwards and backwards compatibility. Both consoles can play both 2600 and 7800 games. They're also the same price, so which one you choose is up to preference. If you have old controllers or cartridges from the 80s, they work on the Plus. Same thing the other way. If you get new cartridges or controllers for the Plus, they will work on your console from the 80s. They even offer new wireless controllers for the Plus, and not only do those work on your old console as well, but they also include a USB dongle so you can use it on your PC or on your Mr. FPGA or on your ROG Flow Z13, whatever you got. Another killer feature of Atari Plus is that you can go on Atari's website and purchase brand new Atari cartridges that work on old and Plus consoles. Physical cartridges that you can buy and own forever, just like the good old days. Boom. Just like that. This isn't even a Plus console. This thing's from 1978, and I just put a new cartridge in it. But it's not just reproductions of old games. Atari pays homebrew developers to make new original games, like Mr. Run and Jump, targeting old consoles and Atari Plus. Watch. Just shove it right in there. Brand new game. This game came out in 2024. Consoles from 1978. This is the equivalent of Nintendo opening a web store, offering an HDMI NES, and selling brand new NES cartridges. That would be insane. Atari has clearly demonstrated that they are not good at actually innovating, so it makes a lot of sense for them to be a preservationist publisher. Seeing them double down on the cult community feels like what they should have been doing all along. All of this pro-consumer behavior would be at their expense, but I don't think Atari has anything left to lose. So they're giving the people exactly what they want by offering homebrew developers an official storefront for their games and ushering in a new age for retro Atari. I think it's very reasonable if you don't want to buy into Atari right now, especially after it just aired out their dirty laundry, but I want Atari Plus to succeed solely for the precedent being set with this. They're demonstrating that there is a demand for an affordable, simple game console with no DRM, no microtransactions, no smart features. You just plug the console into your TV, jam a cartridge into the slot, pick up the joystick, and nothing and no one can come between you and your game. Welcome back to Love Letters. It's time to open the stuff people sent to my P.O. box. Thank you to Pippin for this copy of V-Smile Partyland Park and also cat stickers. Thank you to Devin for the iPiggy, the electronic pork of the future. Thank you to Yellow for this lovely letter, a doodle page, also a Jar Jar Binks card, and a smiley. I promise I will never cheese stream again. Thank you to Rita for sending me a Poochie. Thank you to Retro Zoomin for the lovely letter, and also the homebrew copies of Mario's Carnival Quest and Mother 3 for Game Boy Advance. These are so extremely cool, and I love them. To answer your question, I don't mind being attributed. I'm not scared of Nintendo, and you shouldn't be either. Thank you to Michael for the Leapland Adventures, a whole bunch of DVDs, and a whole bunch of Famiclone consoles. If you've got any Y2K gadgets or lovely letters, send them to my P.O. box, which is in the channel's About page. Much love to all the patrons on patreon.com/clue, and I'll see you in the next one.